Hello everyone, it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm a financial reporter at Activist Insight. Activist Insight is a data and research firm covering shareholder activism around the globe. And it's not only shareholder activists that we cover. We basically, what we do is covering any kind of public engagement between shareholders and companies. The only thing to put it into our data is that it needs to be public. So I'm going to start with the definition of shareholder activism. Previously, Thomas, I think, gave a definition from Google. We have our own, and it sounds like this. The advocacy of minority shareholders that various strategic levers are pulled by a public company in a bid to create shareholder value, which is broadly achieved by improving underlying operational performance, exploring strategic alternatives, lifting governance standards, and returning capital to shareholders. So we may have activism could also be described as either offensive or defensive. These are broad definitions. And the offensive activism is when a shareholder or an investor looks or actively looks to target companies in order to unlock shareholder value via, board representation, divestments, some sort of corporate transactions, M&A, stuff like that. And there are also defensive, which is more reactive activism. These are the types that institutional investors can involve, such as MMG Investments. They recently launched a campaign in France. Here we have Siam. So these are shareholders that are unhappy with what is happening in the company, and they try to make changes. The perfect example in France of this defensive activism would be a campaign that was recently led by Fee Trust and Comgest and a number of other institutional shareholders at EssilorLuxottica in the face of a governance crisis. So this is an example of a reactive campaign. Now, I hope not to bore you too much with data. There's a lot of charts. So we can see that the number of companies publicly subjected to activist demands globally has increased over the past 5-6 years. The trend is there. Activism is on the rise, but growth has always been uneven, and with some years up, some years down. This year in 2019, we are actually going to see a 5-year low. These are year-to-date figures, but we really doubt that it's going to match even 2016 figures. So it will be around 2015. Yeah, and well, the reason why we see this unevenness is because many activist funds launch or they run their campaigns over a period of 3 to 5 years. So many, in some years, are more active than in others as they continue their campaigns that were launched in previous years. So this is. There are many other factors why the activity has slowed down, but this is one of the reasons, one of the structural reasons. There are also trend-based reasons, such as the macroeconomic environment, but I don't want to get into that too much. If we look at Europe, so it is continental Europe without the UK, we actually see that this year is one of the slowest since 2015. You can see the number of companies that were targeted year to date. So continental Europe has really slowed down, and There are anyway a set of positive drivers that attracts activists in continental Europe, and this is obviously undervaluation compared to the US, and I think Thomas also had a slide a much better. He explained basically why European companies are undervalued compared to the US, and not so against Japanese or Asian companies. There are, in certain ways, there are easy avenues for value creation. So in the US, most of the low-hanging fruit has been picked a long time ago. Now, activists, particularly foreign ones, are going into Europe because there are easy avenues such as share buybacks and break up conglomerates. Why not? The Europeans are less happy, and European corporations are not really in favor of this kind of financial engineering. But there are cases where large companies such as Nestle were happy to pursue share buybacks. So we also have the European Union Shareholder Rights Directive, which encourages broadly engagement between shareholders and companies, and this also provides some opportunities for activist investors. Negative drivers is we have a lot of anchor shareholders everywhere. In France, this is also the case. In Italy, Germany as well, maybe a little bit less. But this is a prevalent issue, and obviously, when you have an anchor shareholder, it's much more difficult to engage and to push forward your thesis if you are an activist. So I already talked about aversion to financial engineering and better opportunities elsewhere. In Japan, the government, we'll see a slide later, the government is really encouraging activism. So obviously, before targeting Europe, some activists, before venturing abroad, some activists may think, okay, let's go to Japan because it's easier to do something there. So the main takeaway, the activism in Europe, at least public one, is down, and well, we've been told that these numbers is just the tip of the iceberg, and obviously, a lot of engagement happens behind the scenes. So, next slide. Yeah, we have put a slide on the number of France-based companies publicly subjected to activist demands. So we see actually, while in Europe activity has dropped, in continental Europe I'm talking, in France activity has maintained the same level. This year we have 10 companies publicly targeted by activists, and I think we could be on track for a record this year. 3 more companies need to be targeted. A few trends, and I believe you know this trends much better than we do. We have undervalued, obviously, relative to other markets such as the US and even the UK. As I said, the number of companies targeted remains steady. One trend is that cultural barriers for foreign activist investors. So this may be a thing that there's a barrier to foreign activists. Yeah, I'm told to hurry with my presentation. So we have a few charts here. They're interesting, but we'll move on because I want to show you who is driving this activity. And as you can see, a large part of the activism is by foreign investors, mostly US, but also some UK funds. This year, 60% of the companies targeted by activists, 60% of companies were targeted by foreign activists, and the rest is home-based activists, and you can count them on one hand as Siam, and potentially a few others. So most of the demands, there are a few, there's not a lot of activists, but there are a few demands, and we see that board representation is a big one. So activists are, when they target the company, they typically would seek to improve governance, to improve the board, ask for more an independent board, and things like that. One other trend is that most of the activism has been in M&A if we take out governance. So the economic activism is actually more in M&A. And if we go to the next slide, is not in pushing for M&A transactions or pushing companies to sell themselves, but actually oppose M&A. A company has announced a transaction or considers a transaction, and some activists may come and say, okay, we don't like the terms of this transaction. Earlier, now less so, but earlier there was heavy use. Most of the activism was the use of the squeeze-out process, and I think a campaign launched by Elliott Management at XPO Logistics is still ongoing. But we also have one interesting campaign of Siam, opposed the terms of a Renault merger, and then Fiat Chrysler went away. That merger did not take place, but for other reasons. And we have less known campaigns, maybe for such as Ledbury Capital. They unsuccessfully opposed MPI merger with Marel on Prom. This is an M&A breakdown. If we go just briefly, some trends in other jurisdictions. So we see UK is actually a hot market right now for activism. In 2019, we think we might see a record year, and at least it will match 2018. And last year was a 5-year high. So. What's attractive about the UK is US activists mainly have been, they've been mainly responsible for the
sorry,
campaigns.
We have to...
Yeah, it's just this one and then the next one, and okay. That's it. Yeah, I promise you. Yeah. But an interesting trend we can see in the UK is that most of the campaigns, so around 50%, are launched by foreigners as well. So it's a similar trend in France. Last, we can see that the number in Japan is also, activity is trending up, and as I already said, government encourages activism, and an interesting thing is now the 3rd largest market in the world. So after the US and Australia. Earlier this year, Japan was actually the 2nd market after the US. So this is a big thing. Shareholder activism, a lot of shareholder activism happens in Japan. I think this is going to be it. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you to organizer Draw and Croissants and AXA for hosting. And if you have any questions, feel free to get back to me, and yeah, we can talk.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Iuri. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, we can start our second roundtable with Alessio Passes from professor at the University of Amsterdam, Angus Mine, directeur Risk of Compliance de TCI, et Paola Perotti, CEO de Go Investment Partner, animé par Alain Pietrangosca. Pietrangosca, excusez-moi.